Right, so the subject of me ramble today is about Pibroch. And for those of you that aren't familiar with these rambles and videos, basically I like to cover aspects of. Now, don't mind that wind. I'm out for a walk and I'm talking into a phone and it's under my hood. So, and the wind is changing directions and I'm moving. So, if there's a bit of wind, just I'm sorry. You just have to tolerate it for a bit, but it shouldn't be too bad because the phone's under the hood, and so I'm sorry, but it'll pass. Um, yeah. So basically, if you're not familiar with these videos, I try to cover all sorts of aspects of piping. Mostly sort of the cultural and historic aspects of it, and kind of advice as well to beginners or someone starting off. And these videos are intended for people who are kind of starting out on the piping journey and kind of just getting into the world of bagpipes. And I think I should share my limited knowledge, and I do stress that limited. I'm not an expert in any field. I've no official qualifications. I've just had a deep interest in piping for, I don't know, the last, well, definitely 25 years anyway. Yeah, maybe longer, about 27, almost 30 years anyhow. I've been deeply interested in pipes since I was a kid. So these are kind of things that I pick up along the line, and I just share what I do know about them, or I share my opinions about them. I'm not always right by any means. A lot of these videos are kind of journeys of discovery for me as well. Some of them I might have to take down in the future because I've given out the wrong information or something like that. So I as much kind of learn myself while I'm doing these, and I'm trying to air out the topics. I learn myself, yeah, along the way, and I just try to share that with others. So it's kind of like, treat it like I'm literally out for a walk in the woods, and I kind of chat like as though I'm chatting to a mate or a friend about a topic. I found that I can talk for hours and hours on end about piping, and essentially, unfortunately, I've very, very few people that I can actually talk to about this subject in depth. So I end up with my head full of all these thoughts, and I don't know, it's a bit sad really, like it's like I'm talking to an imaginary friend, talking to my phone. But anyways, I say, look, these videos are sort of more so designed for people who are kind of new to the world of piping and the different facets of it and aspects of it and cultural backgrounds. And what I'm mostly interested in is kind of piping from kind of the Gaelic world. The you know, I know there's pipes played in Bulgaria and the Middle East and that, and I am interested in that, but you know, the centre of my world really is the Gaelic piping world. And not just that, like it, you know, the piping of these two islands as well. Overall, like it's not that I'm not interested in English piping or Welsh piping, because I am, but most of my focus is on basically Ireland and Scotland. Just real quick, and I'm sorry if you've heard all this before, like, but just I'm kind of aware that with each video I make, I get more listeners, and so I started off in uilleann pipes when I was 15. I found them very, very difficult, and I gave up by the time I was 20, so 5 years. But I still wanted to continue piping, so accidentally kind of I ended up with a set of Scottish Highland pipes, and I stuck with them. I got on okay. Then I started playing small pipes, and now it's come full circle, and I've recently again got a set of uilleann pipes, and I've taken up the uilleann pipes again. So that's where I am with piping, and that's how I'm really deeply interested in those, all the different aspects of piping from, and those kinds of pipes, essentially the pipes of these two islands. So Essentially, anyway, one of the major topics of piping that I've come across down the years, and I haven't studied it practically hardly at all, and I'm coming at this myself from a novice point of view. I just know a little bit. I think I can give you a sort of a skeletal kind of outline of what it is, but it's definitely my intention and aim, and it's part of my vision going forward. I'll do another video about that as well, my vision. But basically, I set myself a 7-year plan. A 7-year plan to be a much more all-rounded, more competent, more kind of encompassed piper, playing mostly bellows blown pipes from Scottish small pipes to the pastoral pipes and uilleann pipes, and I've set this focus for 5 years. I want to learn, I want to increase my vocabulary, I want to increase my knowledge, I want to massively increase my practice, and so that at the moment I'm 2 years into the plan, so in 5 years time I'll actually have something to show for it. So I've kind of put together my own curriculum, and it's essentially like it's a practice plan, but it's my own curriculum, and there's certain topics that and aspects and features of piping that I want to cover. So this is one of them, pibroch, and I'm setting out on this journey myself as a complete novice. So again, this is like me talking to someone who knows even less than me. But if anyone is listening from the pibroch network, I hope you might take a few of these little things, what I'm saying, on board. I left a comment on your YouTube video, which I was delighted you've got back together, and you know, I really appreciate the effort that you are making. And this is by no means a criticism of yours, or you know, I deeply appreciate it. I just thought I'd make this video as well to kind of throw in a few ideas that I think will really help people across the world get a greater grasp and understanding of pibroch itself, what it is, and how we can like easily learn it, like where it came from, kind of what happened to it. And that's what I'm interested in, is kind of, yeah, what it is and what happened to it, and what we can kind of do about that now. Can we kind of bring it back to the way that it was, and can we make it accessible and easy and less strict and more interesting and less, sorry to say, less boring? So right, that's my little introduction to this. So here goes, here's the start of it. Right, so for people who don't really know, like, what is pibroch? Well, pibroch is just the Gaelic word for piping, right? So it's a bit of I think it's a bit of a shallow term for the thing. Sure, any type of piping is just piping. And in Gaelic, if you speak Gaelic, when you say pibroch or pibroch, we just generally mean piping in general. But it has come to mean the kind of, you know, the classic music, if you will, of the bagpipe. Ceol Mór, it's often called, or great music. In Irish we'd say ard nósach, and that means kind of high notions. You know, it kind of has, I don't know, maybe morphed or developed or crystallized or fossiled, whatever the word is, fossilized, whatever the word is. In general terms, it's a certain style of kind of the ancient music of the bagpipe, and it is supposed to be like some of the most ancient and kind of archaic tunes. Sorry a second. Sorry, I was just checking my phone. Something happened with it. Anyway, it's okay. Yeah, it's the kind of, it's supposed to be the most, you know, kind of, yeah, ancient kind of classic music of the bagpipe, kind of set aside from other types of pipe music. It's generally like slow, extremely slow, I would say painfully slow, and to a lot of us pipers, even ourselves, like it's a mystery. and it's something that we're kind of afraid of because it's kind of heavily policed. It has been so. It has been heavily policed, um, and it kind of has developed into something that's very strict and I don't know, like regimented, and has sort of solidified into something that I think perhaps it shouldn't have. Now, this is just my opinion, and I don't kind of know enough about it to say these things, but from what I'm learning, this is what I'm getting. So essentially, if you take sort of say the ancient music of the pipe, bagpipe, especially in the Gaelic world, these pipe tunes were kind of composed for various kind of purposes, central to Gaelic life. So many of the kind of big occasions in someone's life. So, say a tune, say in praise of a chief, um, and these types of tunes were played kind of often accompanied with the praise poetry. Like, we're talking about Gaelic bardic society here, so you have a whole retinue of historians, of like genealogists and historians that were part of any chief or minor king or whatever's retinue that knew the stories of the forebears of the clan, if you will, knew the history of the thing and put these stories into rhymes and songs and praise poetry, and often that was accompanied with music. Very early on, it was, I believe, mostly it was the harp, and then kind of from roughly, this is roughly now, kind of from the start of 1500 onwards, on 14 and 1500s onwards, the harp became kind of sort of eclipsed then by the bagpipe. And then the harp started to fall out of use in the 17 and 1800s, and the pipes took up kind of the prominent place. This is just a rough sort of overall history of it. So these tunes were sort of composed for kind of important sort of occasions in the events and lives of that world, of the families of that Gaelic bardic sort of world, and they come from a bardic school. So essentially there'd be songs, tunes, poets about, as I say, praise poetry of a chief, which would be sung and played and recited on the inauguration, say, of a new chief. The death of someone, something could be composed on a great person's death. Sort of celebratory tunes, like maybe a victory that happened after a battle. Rallying tunes to get people geared up for battle. I'm sure births of children as well would have been really important, although I've not really come across that very much. So the cycles of life, marriages, births, deaths, battles, and these ancient tunes were kind of, handed on orally and orally before music was ever written down. And so there's a really deep connection with what we now call pibroch. Before it was written down, it was given on, as I say, verbally and orally, so with your mouth and with your ear. So you'd sing a simple tune. It was handed on that way in a manner that it would be easy remembered. So it was generally done in sort of phrases, kind of simple, as far as I can make out anyway. The ones I've come across, they're mostly always just simple lines, just a few phrases that capture the air or the tune of the song, so that it's easy to remember, so that when the teacher is teaching the pupil about And this, by the way, isn't just for Pibroch. This was the way all music was handed on. This happened for the lively tunes, soft tunes, and slow tunes and happy tunes and all sorts of tunes. They were all passed on this way. In Irish, we still have it a bit. It's like lilting, like that's like da da dum da diddly da 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 dum, that sort of stuff. And in Scottish, you have it as well, and in Puerto Bale and various sort of forms of counteract where you're using these phrases like he, re, ho, lo. Uh, uh, I can't do now counteract, or I can't like, but like he, re, hey, ro, ho, lo, lo. These sort of terms just to kind of capture the tones, I suppose, that you're trying to capture. So that's the way all the music was handed on, all of it, before. Sure, it was only written down started from the 1600s onwards, 1700s especially. So prior to that, there was literally none of this. So this is the importance of Pibroch and many of the ancient airs, is because this is the way that they were handed to us, and it has been preserved, and this is why I'm interested in it, because it was handed on that way. But apparently, and I don't know about the years, so the people in the Pibroch sort of societies and clubs and experts on Pibroch would know these sort of years and dates much more than I would. But anyway, somewhere along the line, these tunes that came to us that way became, well, written down for a start, which preserved them in one manner, but in another manner they sort of fossilised them. So just the way that whoever wrote it down, that's exactly the way that has to be played, like from forevermore, with no variations. And I could see why, the people wanted to preserve the thing. Like, I mean, the Gaelic culture was sort of vast, disappearing. I'm not going to go on too much about this because I've read a book that actually argues against it. But the general consensus is that, like, in Ireland, right after Kinsale, the Battle of Kinsale, and in Scotland, roughly 145 years later after Culloden, the old kind of Gaelic order had collapsed, and these traditions weren't going to be passed on. The world had changed, and and these styles and that kind of life and kind of wandering bards and minstrels and ended up wandering because there was no real place for them anymore in the new world. And there was a genuine fear from, like, actually well-meaning people actually in London, as well as up and down Ireland and Britain, to preserve these old songs before they disappeared altogether. And so you had it in Scotland with, like, kind of things like the Highland Society, and they tried to just get these tunes down on paper. In Ireland, there was, like, Bunting, for example, tried to preserve the harp music, and so there was a brilliant effort, and thank God that there was for to preserve this music in its written form. But that, as brilliant as that is, what has happened sometimes, and especially with this form of pipe music, Pibroch, is that it has now sort of solidified into something down the years. And as I say, there's supposed to be a few key years that I'm not aware of, the actual key years, but there's supposed to be several years where there was kind of changes happening to Pibroch. Or what was sort of, the best I can understand is what sort of happened was some forms of Pibroch were the accepted ones that were kind of maybe, I don't know, pleasing to the ear of the day and the tastes of the time, and then that became the standard. And then other variants of the same tune, song, pibroch was abandoned. And then eventually, not just abandoned, eventually like frowned upon. So you get the whole thing sort of solidifying and kind of becoming like, you know, concrete. Like it starts to set and then that's it. You can't change it after that. And some might argue for that that's a good idea, and others will say no, you need a bit of musical expression and a little bit of variation locally. It happens naturally with music. And that's kind of one of the key differences that didn't happen with Irish music. Irish music is much more sort of fluid, and you could get, what's mad about Irish music is you can get like one particular tune and you could play it, but like 10 different players could have their own slightly different version of it, but it's still recognisably the same tune. But more than likely, if those 10 musicians got together in the session, they'd do a good job of it, because my little bit just sounds a little bit different maybe for a few seconds, and then your little bit sounds a little bit different somewhere else, and so on. But kind of the vast majority of the tune is kept is integral, and what I'm doing then actually sounds like a bit of a decoration. My little different bit sounds a bit more maybe decorative than the main thing, and your bit sounds like another little decoration. And so when those 10 different musicians get back together and they play that same tune, the tune can be played by them all. So that's the kind of the beauty of Irish music. And for various different kinds of reasons, in Scotland anyway, this sort of didn't happen as much, we'll say. And so I don't think I spoke too much, and this is where I'm going to get to it now, of the connection between pibroch and cantareacht, or Puirt a Béal. Now, this was the if you want to say like the wording of those tunes. So say I have a tune that I want you to learn. It doesn't really matter what it is. It could be a lament. It could be, you know, yeah, like a sad slow air. It could be a heartbreaking song about a lover that's left and you'll never see them again, or it could be something a little bit more merry, maybe about a bit of pride in it, like, yeah, a victory in a battle, or all those kind of life's topics, right? So I put simple words to it. Now, oftentimes these aren't sort of songs, and as we kind of understand songs, where there's like verses and verses, and each verse tells another little chapter in the story, and there's music accompanies the verse, and these are slightly different. These sort of songs, in inverted commas, just have simple little lyrics added to them that give you maybe an overall gist of the picture. So they'd say the main type of words in it, and now some of them did come from, now I'm kind of correcting myself now, some of them laments did come from, especially in the Irish sense, like the keening laments. Like there's a one called Cuinu Arti Lere, and I mean it's pages long of verse, and I don't know, is there an air to Cuinu Arti Lere? Is there like a tune to it? But I know that the keen goes on. So I'm kind of gathering that some of these keens used, not just keens, some of these songs used simple phrases that helped you to remember, and others, maybe that's what evolved into another direction, just into general songs, you know, just like in Irish we have a thing called Shan No singing, and I want to explore that connection maybe later on in this talk. So anyway, what kind of happened in the end, for some various reasons in Scotland, was that I believe it to be after the music was written down, they solidified, and as the years rolled on and generations rolled on, some things remained kind of copper fastened, and you cannot like move away from this or else it's wrong. And then in other aspects, some things were favoured more than others. Maybe little nuances might have crept in, even allowing for that. Maybe, you know, someone might have just done something slightly different and then that became the norm. And then the older way of doing it then was sort of dropped. So, you know, some people would argue that, you know, the pibroch, the classic pibroch that you hear today isn't the way that it was performed 300 years ago. And some of them argue, no, it is exactly the way it is. So there is a bit of a big argument going on in the whole thing. But here's where I kind of want to throw my tuppence worth into it. And because I'm so interested in that topic, oh yeah, just one little thing. So that's what Cantaracht and Portabale is when you vocalise or verbalise the tune. So in Irish, like, cant just means like to talk, like coint means to speak or to talk. And it's also, you know, in French you have chant means to sing, and in English you could say chant, and of course that's where we get even our word for our chanter. Like chanteur means the singer, or the chanter means to sing something. So to sing or to speak or whatever. So coint is the Gaelic word for to talk. So that's Cantaracht, means to talk. So put words into something. And Portabale, Puert means like a tune or an air, and Bale means your mouth. So tunes of the mouth, or mouth songs, mouth music sometimes it's often called. And Cantaracht and Portabale are still there. And it also survives in other sort of little things like children's rhymes, lullabies, little playful little rhymes sometimes that kids might have done at play, skipping, and maybe an old person might sing you a little kind of a jingle, I suppose, like a bit of a funny song, I don't know, about a frog or something like that. And also working songs like rowing, fishing, walking the wool, and then sad keening like funeral laments. And it has survived on in the folk music of Scotland largely. But here's the kind of crux of this matter. There's a sort of a disconnect now, I would argue, between how the tunes were conveyed in the first place with Cantaracht and Portabale to how they were fossilised in stone in the pibroch that we have now, that's very strict and rigid. So I want to just sort of open that up a little bit, and I'm not an expert on this, and I've only learned stuff from other men that have gone before me, and women. So I was blessed, and I have to say blessed, right, that my first time that I ever came across pibroch was, I got a cassette in the early 1990s from a library, and it was by George Moss. Now, just before I tell you about that George Moss cassette, for most of us, if you go on YouTube now and you put in pibroch, and I know pibroch, it's even hard to spell it. There's about, like, we spell it different in Ireland than they spell it in Scotland, and then there's a sort of an Englishy version, or whatever version I use here, pibroch, just, you know, an anglicised version of it. But even that, presents a difficulty. How do you spell it? But once you do put something into YouTube, right, and you come up and you listen to most pibrochs, right, and this was my opinion, has been my opinion for an awful long time about it, right, it's like a slow air, let's just say, right, a slow air, okay. Now, generally, I love slow airs. I actually like slow airs more so than I like twiddly diddle stuff, and I know Irish musicians hate when you call it twiddly diddly eye stuff, but anyway, I love the slow air. I love the beautiful simplicity in a slow air, but I love the circles that a slow air does. I love there's a little story in it. if there are words to it, and even if there aren't words to it, you can put your own story to it in your mind. But there's a sort of a homecoming in a slow air. It has a sense of place. It has a sense of kind of. There's the sort of home notes where you'd start off with something, and you might repeat that verse once or twice or whatever like that, and then the listener gets accustomed to this, and then you might take it up a notch, or maybe take it down a notch into the next part of the song, and then you get used to that, and then you come around full circle then to the first bit which you were familiar with hearing, and then the whole thing turns into a song, and it turns into a cycle, and it's slow. And slow airs are easy to remember, they're easy to sing, and they're easy to play, and I said there's just a beautiful simplicity in a slow air that I love. But here's the problem with the pibroch that most of us have as pipers. It's just too feckin' slow. It's like being slowed down to such a degree that you don't know what the next even fucking note is going to be. Like, the notes just last and last and last and get repeated, and then they get decorated a little bit, and then you're kind of going, well, what the hell is it? Like, what's the next note gonna? I'm after forgetting the melody. So they've been slowed down to such a degree that you've actually lost track of the melody itself. And then there's all these embellishments thrown into it, as I said, on the notes. There's all sorts of names for them, like cadences or something like that. Then there's crahany, which means shakes. And in Irish we have a similar word, like we call it cran. Like to cran something means, it's very hard to explain. You get it in uilleann pipe and cranning. But it's a decoration basically. But the idea of these decorations were to maybe highlight a certain few notes or emphasise a certain few notes. But it appears to me that the decorations are now the actual notes that are being studied themselves for their own sake, and that the decorations have taken over from the actual melody that's lost now because the whole thing is too damn slow. So I found myself just totally lost listening to standard pibrochs. Like, the first time I came across them, I think ever, was on like a different cassette I got out of the library. Then we turned into CDs. Very rarely would you hear one anyway. And then of course with the internet 20 years ago, all that changed, and thankfully and everything, but they just sounded so bloody damn slow and so meandering and directionless and random even. Like, you get like a low note jumping to a high note and then back to a low one and then the middle, and it all just sounded like where's this coming from? Like, how did we get from that to that? And like, what could have been a 3, 4, even 5 minute nice slow song or slow air ends up being a quarter of an hour or 25 minutes long, half an hour. I don't know how long they can go on for. So most of us just don't understand it, and it's never explained to us where they came from or how this happened. And to be honest with you, I just lost total interest in them. I just thought, no, these are so actually boring. It's just boring. And I once thought, like, I could go out now and make up my own one and just play the same note again and again, and then play some variation of it, and then just add some random note and carry this on for minutes on end, and no one's gonna know. Now, I know that's a very like silly thing to say. Like, experts in pibroch would know that what I'm doing is just all random and long, but I think 99% of Joe public wouldn't know the difference. So this is what a lot of people have reckoned has gone wrong with the pibroch, and that actually means now that there's a massive wealth of like knowledge and folklore and customs and like lost now, because we've just got, oh, not this shite, this is just boring now, I'm not going to listen to, I don't have a half an hour, sorry, to spare just to listen to this one thing. You know, give it to me in 5 minutes and I'll listen to it. And I know maybe that's an affliction of the modern age, like our attention spans or whatever have shortened, but like, I think anyway, most of us just get turned off. And then even for players and, you know, men and women that have taken to learning the pibroch like the best they can, they learn it meticulously, phrase for phrase, and then they just get scrutinised like in competition, or if someone else, like I heard, I think it was Alan MacDonald, and I'll speak about him in a second. He said like someone always ruined it on you. You know, you spend days and hours and maybe months learning this thing, and you go out and play it to the best of your ability, and someone always has to come along and go, yeah, well, you know what, that's not the right way to play it. Like, you made a mistake here, you made a mistake there, that's not the way so and so played it, and I don't know where you got that version from it. And it's just so soul destroying, and it's awful being scrutinised as well. That's why most of us don't like competition. Like, look, a lot of people do love being compared to others and I'm better than you and all that, but I personally don't. And because I don't like being scrutinised just because I'm not playing to someone else's tastes. Sure, most of the time I'm not even playing to my own tastes, never mind someone else's. So a lot of us have disregarded pibroch, and I think it's such a shame. It's such a real damn shame. So I try to understand this a bit better and kind of get to the bottom of it, and get back to these old simple folk songs, and the true meaning behind them, and the little stories, and what way might they have been played, or most possibly would have been played. And I came across, I'll just give you, just before I just change the sort of subject a little bit, I'll just give you an absolutely beautiful one that I've just recently learned. And I think it's the foundation of a pibroch, which I think they call the urlar. And urlar in Gaelic means the ground or the floor. Seamus Ennis, the famous Irish uilleann piper, went over to the island of Barra in the winter of 1946-47, and he collected this tune that was called Port na Alla, or Oran na Halla, and it was the song of the swan, or the tune of the swan. And I can't say this the way Seamus Ennis said it, but I'll just give you like a tiny little example. And this to me is a true grain, or a true remnant of pibroch coming from a cantarach. Whether you may or may not know this, swans don't sing to each other, only when they're dying. And the other thing about the swan is as well is that they marry for life. So the only time that the swan ever gets to sing a song or listen to a song is when he's dying. And so the dying swan sings this song for the first and last time to its partner. And then what happens is that partner, when it's its turn to die, has nobody to sing that song to. So it sings. He sings or she sings the song of its partner again. Now I don't know for sure, does he add his own bit to it? But there's nobody to hear it. So I think that's really sad. So the old people on the island of Barra, they received this song from a dying swan, and they memorised it by putting very simple words to it, as what I would call, I don't know, for all yous out there that know more than me, I don't know whether I'd call this a Cantaracht or a Puerta Bail. Because in Gaelic, they kind of mean, I'll just explain to you what it means. So, to me, I speak Gaelic, so I could say either, without getting too technical. But, here goes, I'll just do it. So, this is the noise that the dying swan makes. And I got it from Seamus Ennis. And then I heard his recordings as well. I also posted it on YouTube if you want to hear it. Just look up my other YouTube videos. It's the Dying Swan. But it just goes. Gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiko, gibbike. Crach siad munyad, crach siad munyad, crach siad munyad, smihein in erin. Gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiko, gibbiko. And that's it. That's it. And Seamus Ennis played that on his uilleann pipes, and it sounded beautiful, especially the gibbiki, gibbiko bit, because that's the noise that that the Dying Swan is making. And he done it beautifully on his uilleann pipes, and he played it actually in the key of C, which is lovely. And that's just enough. Like, I just remember that there. Like, and if you listen to that 10 times, you'll know it. 9 times. You'll know it. And so these pibrochs came from this. This was the way to pass on the thing. And I'm not going to go into it because I don't fully understand it either. But who chose the words of that? What did that? Crach siad munyad means they raided my nest. It's me hain in Ireland and me in Ireland. Now, is that a reference to? Is it a reference to a king, a chief? Is it a reference to the person that actually... Is it a personal thing about the person that took down that song from the Swan? Now that I can't say. But that's just one verse, and there's another just simple verse to it. Muchusandu, muchusandu, muchusandu. It's me hain glay gal. I've got black legs, but myself, I'm lovely and white. Now, whatever that means as well, is there a double meaning in that? Like, meaning, I don't know. But that's all that's in the entire song. There's just 2 phrases. Crach siad munyad is me hain in Ireland, and muchusandu is me hain glay gal. That's all. That's the whole thing. And gibbiki, gibbiko, gibbiki, gibbiko. That's the chorus. And I think it's beautiful. Right, maybe we didn't do the best job of it there, but listen to the Seamus Ennis one and it's lovely. And the original recordings that he done as well. They were brother and sister, and I'm just so ashamed to say that their name eludes me right now. And I don't have time to check it because I'm out in the forest. But I know they're the brother and sister on Barra, and the man was a piper. But somehow anyway, and as I said, this is where it's all gone wrong, right? So somehow the pibrochs just got long, drawn out, directionless, overcomplicated and boring, and they lost their whole meaning and feeling. Like, there's no feeling in them. You can't get stored up emotionally by the thing because it just sounds like a whole lot of random notes at times. Like sort of jazz, sometimes jazz in slow motion or something. So, luckily for me, now I'm at the second part of this video. I've already been talking for 3/4 of an hour, so I don't like to go over the hour. But luckily for me, and again, this is my appeal to the Pibroch Network, if anyone's still listening to this. My first ever encounter with Pibroch was was from a cassette made by George Moss. Now, George Moss lived from 1903 until 1990. And this cassette was only released in 1982. George was disillusioned with how the Pibroch scene was going in his own day because of what he saw was changes in piping style by a very strong establishment. He argued that there were definite changes happening in his lifetime that he didn't like, and he openly disagreed with them. So he made this wonderful cassette, and I'm gonna provide a link to the cassette here. Just click on the link below for it, right? Hopefully no one ever takes it down. Actually, I'd advise you to save it on your own PC in case someone does take it down. But he made this cassette in 1982. Now he's like 80 years of age when this cassette eventually got released, right? And it's just a beautiful, simplistic explanation of Pibroch, and a lot of it is just what I just done there, the Song of the Dying Swan. He tells you a little story, a tiny little story, a little bit of history about what happened, what was the occasion. He sings a few little phrases of it, and he plays it on his practice chanter, and he also plays it on the big pipe. And I learned more off that. I was so blessed that was one of my first ever encounters with Pibroch. Well, my first memorable one where I kind of went, right, what is this? And thankfully it was George Moss. Now, he was an outsider in his thing because of these changes. And yes, he was able to bring back the Pibroch in my heart. I understood it then. I understood, right, okay. And he'd go into these sort of ancient history stories as well. And folklore comes into it. And he just done it simply and effectively. And I just thought, yeah, I get this. And he played it at a far quicker pace. Now I think there's only about, unfortunately, I forget exactly, there's probably about 15 tracks on the whole cassette, that's all. But he makes them easier they're so well presented and they're so easy to remember, and you come away feeling that you learned something there. You learned a new tune that you can remember, that has some direction, that has some structure to it. I'm not saying Pibroch doesn't, I know it does, but to me it's just that slow that you can't recognise it. And I've actually found myself speeding up Pibrochs, which is easy to do. Even on YouTube, just click the little settings button and you can double the speed of it and then actually hear a tune in it, if you're lucky. But, so here was my first step on that road to beginning to understand what a Pibroch was. And then, the next man that I have to mention is Alan MacDonald. Now, Alan MacDonald done a much more comprehensive talk and history of Pibroch because he's a far more accomplished piper and historian on pipes than I'll ever be. So I'd really encourage you to listen to his talk that he gave. Again, I'll give the link down below. But he was another outlier, and he had the same sort of sentiments. If you listen to him in interviews as well, I'm going to put up a few YouTube videos that someone else did of interviews with Alan, but the ones that the other person did are all split into like 5 minutes and 8 minutes and 12 minutes. I'd just like to play Alan's interviews from start to finish, because Alan MacDonald is a fascinating piper. He speaks the Gaelic, as far as I know, even though he was from the mainland in Scotland, so I know that mainland Gaelic speakers are few and far between. And he's steeped in the whole tradition of the pipes, and Alan MacDonald done a talk in 1995, which was recorded well, I don't know who recorded it, but it's up on the internet, and I'll provide the link below. But essentially what Alan MacDonald is saying is he's explaining in much greater detail what I've just sort of gave a skeleton overview of there. where Pibroch came from, what happened to it, its connection with Cantracht and Puerto Bale. And if you want to get to the roots of hearing what the tune would have originally been, listen to the song versions of it, you know? Listen to the simple little poetry versions of it. Listen to the Cantracht versions of it and the Puerto Bale versions. So Alan MacDonald, I came across his talk that explains all that in far much more detail, right? So he's definitely another person to look up. Then after Alan MacDonald, in 2013, David Hester, Lord have mercy on him, and Barnaby Brown kind of came at it in the same vein, as far as I know. Now, I don't know, Barnaby, if you're listening, I'm in awe of what you've done on pipes and the Owl House and other, just even your whole approach to music and piping and the ancient music, reviving it and bringing it back and all. Just if you do ever watch this, you probably won't, but I just wanted to you have my deepest gratitude for your work. But yeah, a man called David Hester picked up on all this as well, and he really made massive efforts to revive Pibroch and explain it and slow it down and give it the phrases. Now lads, I'm not an expert on this. I didn't watch all his videos. I'm new to it and I'm coming at it from a virtually ignorant place. I know a little bit. Obviously I wouldn't be talking for the last 3/4 of an hour, but whatever I do now, I've picked up off all the aforementioned people. So David Hester has a YouTube channel, it's still there, and I think it's called the Alt Pibroch, like alternative Pibroch, and he was trying to basically simplify it, make it more relatable, make it more accessible, less obscure, and all the kind of, I think, bad things that happened to Pibroch along the way. And he was supposed to have gone through hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts and all this wealth, and unfortunately the man died in 2019. But the mantle has been taken up again by Barnaby Brown, and in 2021, just last year, they've saved David Hester's work on all this, and they've re-established it as the Pibroch Network. And I listened to your talk there, where you had sort of kind of, I don't know, founding members or whatever we want to say, that's going to keep the Pibroch Network going, and to revive the work of, or preserve the work of David Hester, and to give us all new learning facilities and insights into Pibroch, and how we can popularise it again, and how we can get kids to enjoy it, and other pipers to get involved in it and understand it a bit better. So just the one little thing that I'd just like to say to any of you, if you are from the Pibroch Network, listening to this, please don't forget the fundamentals of what this thing is, where it's from, and make it presentable to us in an easy and accessible way. Right now, bear in mind, I can't read music. I'm like those pipers of old, where it was handed on orally and orally. I'm like that. I learn by listening and repeating. And so for me, what I've been doing, how I've come to grips with it, is I've gone back to that George Moss recording that's here on YouTube. I've listened to his Cantracht, I've listened to his phrases over and over again. I've listened to him sing it. I've listened to his explanations of how the tune came about and what was the occasion and variants of it. He gives the background. I've listened to him play his practice chanter, I've listened to him play his pipes. And I'd love if you and the Pbroch Network could do something similar. I've listened to Alan MacDonald. Like, where's Alan MacDonald in all of this? Like, I mean, he's instrumental in it. Like, I mean, he's putting words like of like battle songs, like phrases of battle songs. I think it's called a cua in Scots Gaelic, and he's putting it to like he's putting down Pbroch and he's laying like phrases over it. And Alan MacDonald was onto this like back in 1995. So I'm wondering like why isn't he on board, or I don't know, maybe he's doing other things, I don't know, but I'd love to hear more from Alan MacDonald. So I would just appeal to the Pbroch Network that if you could get the sources as well of the folk songs and like the little folk stories and the contract. I heard you saying something about a kist of riches or something like that. Is there a separate website that that we can look up little Scottish folk songs and rhymes and lullabies and things like that? So I'd love if you could, because you're kind of talking about sort of highfalutin ideas about, I don't know, like art installations and kids jumping on tiles and they give notes of Pbroch. And look, I'm not knocking that at all. I respect it, and I know you're trying to make it accessible and child friendly or whatever. But I really think that like we can't lose sight of what it is that we're actually trying to study here. Like what are we actually trying to understand? What are we trying to play? And to do that, I think there's no greater way for me to do it anyway, as a fellow piper, is to understand it, have it explained to me simply, that I could listen to it being done in a Puerta Bail, being done in a canteract. In other words, vocalised, listen to it being sang or lilted or hummed. Listen to folk recordings of those little songs, and then listen to your versions, because you can read music, and I know a lot of it what you have is written down and you are going before a certain year, and that I don't really understand that bit of it. But if you could put down your versions comparative to folk recordings, if you can, if there is an available one, like on the George Moss, like just essentially look at what George Moss has done and look at what Alan MacDonald has done, and they're only scratching the surface of the tip of the iceberg. So if you really endeavour to carry on with all this work, I would focus more on that, on making it understandable and simple and giving the whole cultural context and background and comparative songs and little rhymes. And if you have the recordings, like please put them with your actual Pbroch when you do go to play it, and then we can understand the whole picture of where that thing came from. And also that it's easier for us to understand because it's just done like more so like either a regular slow air or a nice just slow a song. It's just an ordinary song that's sort of slow. Now I'm going to be a little bit cheeky. I just think practice chanters sound just dreadful. Like, I always thought that they sound like a goose with laryngitis. To me, they just always sound out of tune or off. So if you are actually going to go to the hassle of recording it, could you please record them on proper pipes? And that's either Great Highland bagpipes, border pipes, small pipes. I think uilleann pipes would be really interesting. If I dare to ask that. But I was also really interested in what some of your other contributors said about fiddles and harps playing Pbroch. And I've come across a little bit of it alright on YouTube, and I think it's fascinating because the fiddlers and harpers have another way of kind of interpreting it, especially harpers, because if what they say is true, this thing originated in harp music anyway in the first place. So I'd love to see that connection opened up and hear fiddle and harp versions of Pbroch and canteract. So sorry for you lads if you know more about this than I do, if it was all a bit like long-winded. just to get you to this point to ask us this. But as I say, most of my videos are for fellow people who are kind of new to piping and are interested in these sort of subjects that are new to them, and I'm just trying to pass on the bit that I have. But if you did manage to listen to the end, will you, those of you in the Pibroch network, or just any individual people who are doing their own little bit like I'm going to, you know, could you just kind of keep it in perspective? Like, you know, like, I don't think, I'm walking through a woodland now, I don't think that if I put a kid's like playground that played musical notes, I don't think they're going to be any closer to understanding, and I really don't mean that disrespectfully, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I just think that the best way to teach kids is from well, it should come from the home, and it should come from the community first and foremost, contact with adults. And for me to teach a child or a young person about Pibroch, I need to understand it, explain to me simply. I want to know the folklore background of it. I want it broken down, all those things I said. And then once I understand it, then I can hand it on. I don't think you're going to get that on Google Maps and on whatever they're called, QR codes and computer games. I just hope someone, now I understand, like, maybe going forward, I think, yeah, when everyone appreciates what it is, then we might be able to take it to another level. But I think for the moment, the vast majority of us just want to get to grips, literally grips, the grip of a chanter around a Pibroch and not be afraid of it. You know, have it accessible, have it easy, and I really am grateful and thankful and very appreciative of all the work that you are doing so far. So that sort of brings me to the end of the talk about Pibroch. I'm sure I'll probably do a few more as my journey goes along. This is part of my 7-year plan, so you won't really hear me doing much on it for at least 5 years, unfortunately, but it's part of my curriculum that I've done for myself. So for the now, I would encourage anyone, if you are interested in this stuff, is definitely listen to that George Moss recording, and definitely listen to Alan MacDonald's talk. And there's good examples of just, you know, it's really solid foundations to start on. And then look up David Hester and Barnaby Brown, and also the Pibroch network, which is the work in progress. So that's my recommendations, that's my bit of advice. I hope you've got a bit of a better idea about Pibroch than you did an hour ago. And thanks very much for listening, and sure, I'll talk to you again soon.